Hello. I'm going to tell you a story about fear and courage, about oppression and resistance, about risks and responsibilities, about prison and freedom, about despair and hope. 4 years ago, a video footage reached to our newspaper where I was the editor-in-chief. The state's intelligence agency was caught smuggling arms to Islamist militia in a neighboring country. The ammunition was hidden under a layer of boxes of medicine. So this was an illegal operation. And the images provided undeniable evidence. Our editorial team and I had a meeting. We discussed the risks. Our homes will be raided. We were taken away. We won't know how long we'll stay in prison. We knew we had seen this story before. In fact, assassins or bombers had already claimed the lives of 6 of our colleagues. We knew from the first day that if you write this story, you'll be killed. If you draw this cartoon, you'll be imprisoned. If you use this headline, your newspaper will be bombed. But we always said, don't get into this profession if you can't face it. Let's pause now and think for a moment. What would you do if you had to choose between people's right to know and your freedom, your family, your life? Would you take the risk, or would you say, what on earth would I? Is it worth it? But believe me, it is those what on earth who dies that form the bricks of totalitarian regimes. They are the building blocks of the wall of fear, a wall that imprisons us behind our own fears, one we think protects us, but actually enslaves us. Let's get back to the story. Our editorial team, entire team, said, let's publish it. And the following morning, we ran it on the front page. Here are the weapons the Prime Minister denies. So, the following morning, the Prime Minister, unable to refute the evidence, he said, that was a state secret. The publishers will pay heavily. In fact, it was not the state secret, it was his own secret, by the way. But he couldn't punish us straight away as he was facing an election. The elections took place. A few weeks later, it was our wedding anniversary, by the way. I had booked a table at a fine restaurant for dinner and received an invitation this morning from the prosecutor. If you live in a country without rule of law, you know that an invitation from the prosecutor means you'll be in jail soon. So, which is precisely what happened. The prosecutor demanded the arrest of me and our correspondent in the capital, and he asked 2 life sentences for a true story. The judge didn't even allow us to talk before he said, "You're arrested." So I'd been dreaming of a dinner in an elegant restaurant with my wife, but instead, I found myself in solitary cell with a packet of biscuits in my hand. After us, police raided the homes of every editor of our newspaper. they too were arrested on charges, absurd charges, and spent months in jail. So I had to come into exile to build up my own media outlet here. Its name, Özgürüz, we are free, after an attack by a gunman. He shot at me twice in front of the courthouse, the most protective area in the city, and a colleague trying to protect me was wounded, and I survived thanks to the courage of my wife. Would you like to see it? Let's have a look. She's my wife. So, in fact, what happened is this guy, the gunman, was released after a few weeks in jail, and the judge put his passport back in his pocket while the government put a travel ban on my wife's passport. And it looks like a horror movie, right? But it's not. It's an everyday reality in countries like ours, a reality that doesn't happen overnight. Authoritarianism happens gradually, just like the frog in the cooking pot, slowly coming up to the boil. By the time you realize it, the water is boiling, it's too late. This is how trap develops. First, they scare you. The premise in the 30s Germany was the Jews are out to get you. In the 50s America, the communists are coming. Today, refugees are coming. Islam is coming, scares the West. Islam is going, scares Muslims. The names change, the countries change, but the fears stay the same. Fear disrupts our chemistry. If we don't belong to any organization, any trade union, any party, are alone in the middle of the storm, we feel the need to shelter somewhere. And we usually seek shelter with those who raise the alarm, like a victim in love with the knife. Next, we are asked to leave our freedoms one by one. We should have no objection to a police patrol at every street corner if we want to stroll freely, right? Or to a camera every corner. And we should also give the police random search and phone tapping power so they can catch our enemies. If anyone criticized these demands, couldn't they be serving our enemies? The world is full of authoritarian leaders who use those fears to come to power and who then stay in power by telling the terrified masses, don't worry, I'm here. Fragile democracies in the Americas, Balkans, Middle East, Far East have become totalitarian states one by one. Europe is next in line. The voices of worry, fear, alarm, populism are heard in the UK, Italy, Spain, Austria, everywhere. There is only one way out. Don't be afraid. I learned not to be afraid even more when I was alone in my cell in high-security prison. It was the world's biggest prison for journalists. Turkish prisons hold more journalists than Russian, Chinese, Saudi jails. At present, close to 150 colleagues of mine are still in prison because of their articles or tweets, and they are mostly kept in solitary confinement. Solitary is an advanced punishment tactic employed by the government. You are left on your own so that you feel totally alone. You are kept in dark about what you are charged with or how long you're going to stay there. Prison is a waiting room. All you can do under these circumstances is to wait in silence. In the morning, you wait for the guards to waken you up and unlock the door to a tiny concrete yard just to catch sight of a patch of sky. Then you wait for breakfast to be pushed through the hatch of this door. Next, you wait for your solicitor, for lunch, for the post day, for the once weekly 10 minutes on the phone with a family member, for the indictment, for the hearing, but above all, for discharge, for freedom. Prison is a waiting room, but I decided I wouldn't wait. I was going to force the conditions, transform this tiny cell into a PR office, and call out the world. But how? Can you imagine living without a cellular phone or a laptop? Or the right to talk to other inmates? No chance to send out messages without the warder's knowledge? But you know what? Necessity is the mother of invention. The best teacher of struggle is despair. It teaches you to go over high walls, exit the cul-de-sacs, create solutions in moments of hopelessness. The first thing I learned to do was to communicate with other inmates by shouting into the pipes. Then, how to stick letters to plastic water bottles and lob them over the wall. And placing sandwiches between radiator columns so that you can wake up to a cheese toastie. In time, I discovered ways of sending letters and articles without alerting the warders. The open letter I sent to Chancellor Merkel was published in Der Spiegel. We were brighter than our jailers. No matter how much they tried to isolate us, they couldn't isolate us entirely from the world. Despite the walls, razor wire, and the warders between us, despite all the hardship, we managed to build bridges towards the people who believe in us, in democracy, in freedom. There are still very brave people in my country struggling for democracy against all the aggression they face with, even in jail. 3 examples came to my mind. An artist friend, she was able to send paintings out of prison, even with no paper, pen, or paints to hand. You know how? Imagine. She used the paste of leftover food and her blood to draw on the backs of inmates about to be released. Those images were photographed and published once the carriers were out. This is Zehra Doğan. A political leader in prison. In fact, he is the leader of the 3rd biggest party in the parliament. He is now in prison. He composed and sang a song with no musical or recording instruments. Do you know how? He softly sang to his wife on the phone call, and the musicians outside listened to the recording and performed it. And the resulting title became an instant hit in the country. And the title was, "Don't Be Scared, Shout." This is Selahattin Demirtas. A German prisoner in Turkish jails heard of nightly prayers for him in a Berlin church. Every night, at the same time, he prayed in his cell. And today, he upholds his bridge to hope as he prays in the same church for others still inside. This is Peter Störtner. Impossible is a lie made up by despair. We make the possibility. As creativity is the fruit of impossibility. As our families and friends were ranking their brains about what to do after we've been locked away, an 80-year-old doyen of our profession arrived at the prison gate, carrying a chair. Huddling in his coat, he sat down on his own and started to read a book. When he was asked what he was doing, he explained this was his personal protest against our arrest. On the following day, there were hundreds ready to take over the vigil. Within a few weeks, this number reached thousands, providing to us we weren't alone and bolstering those outside. Sometimes, a single person with a chair, with a wooden chair, can defy a golden throne and alter the balance of power. This is Metacule. Nowadays, a dark cloud hangs over our world. It used to hang over so many countries and people for decades, but the Western world was not affected, as their people were living in peace behind the high walls. Globalization changed everything. Repercussions of elections in Egypt or war in Syria are felt across the rest of the world after all. Increasingly, more people are beginning to consider security as more important than freedom. This is a view that can only serve the despots currently in power or those waiting in the wings. One by one, they are taking away the rights that we have struggled to win over the centuries. Freedom of the press, freedom of expression, freedom to demonstrate, equality of the sexes, supremacy of law, secularity, peace, democracy. Our leaders say, these don't matter, your security does. Choosing between security and freedom will lead to the loss of both. We want them both. We must defend our freedoms in order to break the siege sentencing us to a narrow choice. I guess the majority of the people in this hall were born and raised in a democracy. That may well explain the assumption that democracy is an integral part of life. Sadly, that is not the case. Democracy is not a plastic flower inside a glass vase. It's a rose garden that demands daily attention, and we are the gardeners. Today, democracy is gravely wounded all around the globe. Parties, parliaments, associations, trade unions experience the greatest turbulence seen in our time. Mass migrations, disappearing forests, monsters who behead their victims, psychopaths shooting people, or driving lorries into innocent crowds shake the world. It's becoming impossible to live together. This is the age of drought for humankind, a drought that will bury us all in the cracks unless we all say, stop. And we can say stop because we are the superpower of democracy, you, me, all of us. If you feel weak or helpless or scared, just remember the artist who painted without paints, the politician who composed music without an instrument, the inmate who participated in mass from thousands of miles away, and the old journalist sitting at the gate on his own. they are brave enough to challenge the oppression. Because just as the fear is contagious, so is the courage. Thank you.